live, or people can watch them, can dial in later and watch them whenever it's convenient. It's kind of like I listen to Sirius XM, and the radio program host says you can listen to it now, or you can get on the app and listen to it later. So
Okay.
that's what we're doing here.
One note to everybody, we are live YouTubing this right now to the NWSOFA.org website. If you go up on our website, you'll see a tab that says YouTube. You click on that, and you'll see a whole bunch of videos from the last few years. Just click in the area that says live. That is what we've been doing for the last month now. If you do not want to be seen on the video, please turn off your video camera. All right, Ed, it is all up to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. So I mentioned in the intro, this all started when I was reading a book, but see, what's really going on for me is that a lot of folks are saying about Democrats, you can't just be against Trump, you got to be for something, and I think that's true. Certainly, we have to be against a lot of the terrible things we see going on, but I don't think you win elections just by being against something. I think you got to be for something. But what are we going to be for? Well, after I read this book I was talking about, and I'll show you the book in a moment, I'm thinking to myself, well, look, how about if we figure out how the heck we got here? What did we do wrong to get our country in the shape that it's in now? And it's not just them or us, it's all of us together. What did we do wrong? So the point of this presentation is to understand what the heck we did wrong over the last 40 years, and to realize that uh, it, it's not too late to fix it. But more importantly, the same kind of things are going to continue to happen, and we better get better at it because we have to stop making these mistakes. That's what this presentation is about. Now, as I mentioned, this presentation is all coming about because I read this book. This book by David Lynch, The World's Worst Bet, Globalization. I originally titled this presentation, Globalization, the World's Worst Bet. And Bill said, who's going to care about that, Ed? And I said, well, come on, this explains everything. And he said, well, then you need a better title because nobody's going to understand. This explains everything. This is the book I think everyone should read it. I'm going to give you a summary of it. But if you really care about what you hear tonight, buy a copy of this. And I'm not pushing this because I get a commission or anything. I just think this is a really important book. I know a lot of people won't have time to read it. You got so much to do. So I'm just going to tell you what it says. And the guy who wrote it was a reporter. He was a reporter who was working for Washington Post, for Bloomberg News, for USA Today, for the Financial Times. He's been reporting on this stuff for 50 years. And he has covered all the economic events that from the rise of globalization to its unraveling. His perspective is shaped by being present at the global as globalization unfolded. He gives him a unique authority to explain its trajectory and its failures in this book, and I'm going to summarize that stuff for you right now. We're going to talk about the history of globalization and how it impacted the U.S. How did we fail to manage this stuff properly? What similar challenges? There's going to be similar challenges going forward. So it's not a one-time event. And how are we going to be able to manage them correctly the next time? That's what we're going to talk about. So, back at the end of the Cold War, Americans were enjoying a boom marked by low unemployment, high stock prices. There was political consensus that favored free markets, trade liberalization, and it just seemed obvious at that point that getting rid of international restrictions on flow of capital was the right thing to do. No one nation can produce everything it needed any more than any one state, any one city can. So in those early days, globalization promised kind of a double-barreled win: prosperity at home and peace abroad. That's what we thought back when the Cold War was ending. We thought that we could integrate people from China and India and former Soviet bloc countries into a global economy. And we didn't think that would be, we knew it would be disruptive, but we figured that the adjustment cost would fall, and we knew the adjustment cost would fall most heavily on the least skilled, least educated workers in our country. But the free trade advocates and back then, lots of people were free trade advocates. They insisted that the losers could be compensated. They could be retrained. They could get financial support. We could ease their transition into a more modern economic world. But authoritarian nations such as China and Russia, they would eventually become. We felt they would eventually become freer. Globalization would encourage economic improvement of their middle class, would encourage them to become more democratic. That as their middle classes or became property owners, they would follow the same course that we have. Um, and that seemed to be working in Russia. Gorbachev began overhauling the Soviet Union. Uh, H.W. Bush, he thought there might be a trap here, but he warmed to Gorbachev. In '89, he agreed to cut U.S. forces in Europe to match the Soviet reductions, and there was a détente coming around. In a summit in Malta, the two sides agreed to extend Western trade and investment to Moscow and complete arms treaties to trying to bring Russia into the world economy and hoping that Russia would modernize. And in 1991, when Bush traveled to New Haven, he said that this is the end of a long era of Cold War and conflict. He thought Russia was now becoming a democracy, and he hoped he could say that same thing about China as we brought them into a modern economic world. But it wasn't really working all that well in China. The authorities had brutally repressed pro-democracy protests. Um, the Tiananmen Square massacre. And while critics called for Bush to clamp down on Chinese trade privileges, Bush thought that re- keeping China in the world commerce would help China liberalize. Well, he raised tariffs against China because he argued that raising tariffs against China would hurt our merchants and hurt the merchants in Guangdong province, which Bush thought was a hotbed of resistance to communist rule. Bush wanted to help create a climate for democratic change in China. And his view is that no nation on earth has discovered a way to import the world's goods and the world's services while stopping foreign ideas at the border. So H.W. Bush was thinking, oh, just as democratic ideas have transformed nations on every continent, so they will inevitably transform China. That was the vision back in the Bush days. And Glenn Clinton came along and he embraced it too. A lot of times when somebody from the next party comes in, you see radical changes in policy. But no, Clinton agreed. Clinton agreed that globalization is going to happen. It wasn't a policy choice, it was a fact. We can't avoid globalization, but so we have to manage it. And Clinton was also very clear that the government had to take care of any losers that happened through globalization. He consistently warned that failing to support vulnerable workers that are threatened by economic prosperity, that would threaten the economic prosperity and the foundation of democracy. That would cause resentment and anger, and that and resentment and anger would fuel anti-democratic movements if we didn't address it. Clinton was very clear about that. If we offer these hardworking families no hope for the future, no solution to their problems, no way to the pain. He's talking about people that lost their jobs in rural manufacturing, then fear and insecurity will grow, and the politics of hate and division will spread. Bill Clinton said, if we do not act to bring this country together in common cause to build a better future, then in his day, the neo-Nazi David Duke on the far right and his kind will be able to divide and destroy our nation. That was he thought clearly, and he worked to create NAFTA. He wanted NAFTA to organize and manage international trade. Um, he he uh, he wanted to bring Canada and Mexico into a block with us. There were a lot of organized support. There were a lot of organized labor that opposed this stuff. And Clinton didn't take action on it until right before the election. Uh, and after a long consultation with his advisors during the election, he decided that you have to support the deal. He says, are the new Democrats pro-business? They're pro-business only if we have side agreements on labor and environmental issues were added to the pact that he would submit to Congress for NAFTA. Um, and his viewpoint was they have to because we have to. People are going to move jobs out of our country one way or another, and if we make a treaty to manage it better, then we can get the best out of it instead of just letting it happen willy nilly. Companies were already moving jobs out of the U.S. And American workers were starting to hurt because of what was going on with globalization. Other countries like Germany did a better job of training and educating their workers. And Clinton, his point was, if we do NAFTA right, if we secure federal funds for new training, investment in infrastructure, and investment in technology, that would provide jobs for the people that are going to be hurt through NAFTA. Uh, Protection for the losers of globalization was the important thing in his viewpoint. But as as negotiations went over, major business groups were agreeing to support expanded social net. His idea was to replace the limited trade adjustment assistance program with a much larger package of aid for all dislocated workers, and not even just those who lost from trade deals. When he was talking in the first half of '93, his man Katz, who was on leave from teaching at Harvard, he proposed about a $4 billion program that would include training, job search help, more generous unemployment benefits, wage insurance. Clinton thought that this was a rare opportunity to expand the safety net in a bipartisan manner because the business people wanted to see the NAFTA deal come through. Um, and uh, he thought that he would be able to get both sides to do this. And in the end, believe it or not, it was the unions that killed that deal. And the unions killed that deal because they basically said, our members are doing well, and that's what we care about. If we go out trying to help other people, that could take money away from our members. So the AFI back in Clinton's era, it was actually the AFL-CIO that killed the plan for a big safety net. Um, they liked the idea that trade was separated out. They believed that point out how terrible trade was. They liked the fact that because the old TIA trade deal was a complicated process, you had all kinds of advantages. They liked the fact that there were advantages for union members. So the fact that there were advantages for union members caused organized labor to not support NAFTA, and the idea, the Cass's idea of a big universal programs to help people that need help kind of fell by the wayside in Clinton years. And so NAFTA was implemented. It didn't have a big impact on it at first, but some cities and towns that were most exposed to competition, uh, particularly in textiles, apparel, shoes, and leather, NAFTA did hurt them. It certainly did. The trade deals localized downsides fueled exodus from the Democratic Party for workers. It was an early indication that even as trade benefited us as a whole, it could hurt us in certain locations. China continued to be a problem through all of this. Attempts to get China to liberalize that they imagined were possible just weren't happening. Even so, we continued to give them most favored nation trading status, hoping we could cause them to liberalize. U.S. businesses lobbied hard to ensure that trade with China wouldn't be impeded. And we were trying to get China into the WTO, which in theory would require China to operate their economy the way other modern nations do, in a more open and free economic system, and without a lot of government subsidies, without a lot of government planning. Um, and the American officials believe that the biggest impact if China actually got into the MPO would be a jump in our exports to them. Uh, Imports from China were expected to rise a little bit. The administration at that point saw no reason to expect any substantial increases from Chinese imports at all. And, that was just wrong. That was just plain wrong. U.S. imports from China rose by 25% in the first year after WTO entry, 50% in the first 3 years. And these wrong forecasts demonstrated that Washington didn't understand the side effects of what elevating trade with China was going to do. It was focused overwhelmingly on how to expand commerce would change China. The point is not that our working with China changed China. Our working with China changed us. There was very little thought about how working with China was going to change us. And in the end, there was no help for the losers at all. Um, the domestic agenda, investment agenda, uh, was eclipsed within weeks of the 92 election because of the federal budget. Clinton's team argued that the only way to revive the economy was to first stem the flood of red ink to get rid of the budget deficit. And, Clinton did eventually get rid of the budget deficit. The deficit had nearly doubled from 87 to 92. Um, and those kind of budget deficits were hurting business, were depressing private sector investment, depressing job investment. Well, when Congress finally approved the president's economic plan in 93, uh, the public investments in there were tiny. They were not anything like uh, Katz's advisors had originally screened. Clinton agreed. Clinton agreed to reduce his deficit over the next 5 years. And he thought that only by satisfying investors that he was not a tax and spend Democrat could he win the credibility to later proceed with his expansive domestic agenda of providing a safety net for these workers who were losing out on, but that later never arrived. In 94, Robert Reich warned that the president of the Democrats were in danger of losing the House. Clinton's embrace of free trade was part of the problem why we're going to lose the House. High skilled, educated workers gain a global market for the service, but the low skilled or no skilled workers have to compete with lower wage workers around the world. So, in that next congressional election, 2 months later, the Republicans slaughtered us. They gained the House, and that GOP takeover ended Clinton's dream of having a safety net for our workers because the GOP weren't going to have any of that. And so we got this World Trade Organization going. We wanted them to encourage countries to join, where we would all work together on a fair and equal basis. We expected countries would liberalize their economies and their governments as their population in the middle class. The same dream we had for China all along, China and Russia primarily. Doing that would strengthen peace, giving these nations greater interest in strength and stability through economic ties. But there wasn't any. There was very little public support for the WTO because it was secretive. It lacked transparency. It was behind closed doors. It was a very slow, deliberative process, and there turned into massive protests in '99 about the WTO, especially in Seattle, where the WTO was meeting. Protests were so violent they essentially stopped the WTO meetings from happening. The protesters in the streets were leftists, like all of us. But the funding for the activities, in many cases, came from right wing business leaders that were looking for protectionist policies. It didn't like some of the stuff that was in the WTO. It became clear that there was opposition to globalization in the U.S. coming from both the right and the left. We tried to get China into the WTO, but China, in order to get a WTO, you got to liberalize your economy. You got to embrace free trade. You have to get rid of government subsidies for the most part. You have to get rid of government management. And the Chinese couldn't do that. They didn't want to do that. And they were very slow on meeting WTO terms. But even though they were slow, businesses really started investing in China because they saw a profit opportunity in this China. The economy over there grew rapidly, and they had increasing economic inequality. Chinese businesses at first were just copying what we were doing, but pretty soon they started innovating on their own. They innovated in e-commerce. They innovated in digital payment systems. When you're building something from scratch, you can maybe do better than somebody who has built something 100 years ago and is just evolving it. Um, we assumed once again, we assumed that this evolution of their economy would lead to evolution in their government, their style of government. We expected the improvement in their economy to lead to liberalization of their government. But business leaders wanted to see China in the WTO, and the labor leaders objected. The labor leaders understood that Chinese working conditions were horrible. They saw it as unfair competition in the labor market. They're worried that U.S. would lose jobs to China. How prescient were they? He was able to get normal trading relations with China, but some public support for globalization was nowhere. The loss of Democratic support for globalization helped W. Bush defeat Al Gore. So during W's administration, we tried to keep getting China into the WTO. We finally got him in 2001, but we continued to lose jobs, even though we put some tariffs on. We continued to lose jobs in China. China was able to copy our products, produce them, and ship them here more cheaply than we can produce them ourselves. And they found ways to circumvent some of the WTO requirements. So they did improve their economy, but they didn't improve their government. Their 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 government did not liberalize, and their SARS outbreak was mismanaged. Their work conditions and their pollution were not alleviated. Well, this brings us up to about the Obama period, um, and he maintained tariffs on China, and our industry continued to suffer. Efforts to help displaced workers were terribly underfunded. Labor unions continued to oppose globalization, lest foreign workers obtain collective bargaining rights, which wasn't going to happen. Um, and many manufacturing jobs were lost, but not always just the globalization. In many cases, those jobs were lost to automation, either automation at home or automation in the new factories that offshore people were building. Of course, that was lost on the public. The public just saw our jobs disappearing, and jobs were disappearing mostly in rural communities. The rural communities suffered greatly. Three-quarters of us got a better lifestyle, got better economy because of globalization, but a quarter of us just lost their jobs. And because of that, public support for globalization continued to weaken. And China, throughout this whole thing, is just pushing harder and harder and harder. China insisted that U.S. companies have to share their patents and trade secrets, which allowed Chinese businesses to compete with us, essentially stealing intellectual property, or not necessarily stealing, but requiring us to give it to them. They did all kinds of internet hacking to steal trade secrets. They took all the steps possible, legal or otherwise, to improve their competition with the West. They're trying to do everything they can to improve their country. And because of that, especially during the Obama period, we started to treat China as an enemy more than a partner. Uh, Obama pushed the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and what that was supposed to be a partnership that excluded China and include everybody else around China, so that we could deal with offshoring, but not with China. And the GOP was facing a similar backlash to Trump. Trump was out there constantly saying that we were doing the wrong thing. The GOP was kind of worried about Trump, but they thought they could get Jeb Bush nominated instead of him. And then, well, Trump won. And for Hillary, this was really irony because Hillary had working class whites in Ohio voting for her uh, when she was trying to run. But now the choice wasn't between Clinton and Obama for the nomination. It was between Clinton and Trump. Uh, Trump, who inveighed constantly against millionaires and billionaires. The worst financial crisis since 1930s. Public welcomed the tax on financials and political elite, and there was surprising support for unconventional candidates such as Sanders and Trump, and both were broadcasting relentless anti-trade messages. Show how much the Great Recession has radicalized significant parts of the electorate. Trump leveraged unhappiness over Bill Clinton's globalization to defeat Hillary Clinton. And that's really ironic. The long-term economic dissatisfaction paved the way for a candidate like Trump to win his first term. And in his first term, he withdrew from the TPP. He just wanted to make direct deals. TPP never really went into effect. Asian countries that were to have participated, they created their organization. They created their own kind of TPP that was just them. It didn't include China. It didn't include us either. Trump wanted to attack globalization, but he held back because business leaders were warning him that it would hurt the economy. In Trump's first term, he didn't just do everything he wanted. He listened to other people some. Um, he wanted to kill NAFTA, but instead he chose to renegotiate it and call it his own deal. Um, and he imposed tariffs. He imposed tariffs on the steel industry. Imposed tariffs on China. Um, where am I here? There we go. But there were a lot of contradictions in his policies. He wanted to neglect globalization. He wanted to reduce our trade deficit, but he continued to embrace the traditional GOP economic policies in his first term because he wasn't really doing everything he wanted to do. His 2017 tax cuts increased the trade gap. They increased the trade gap because they increased the federal budget deficit, and that stimulated our economy, and that sucked in more imported goods and the continuing offshoring of intellectual property ownership, other administration functions allowed companies to avoid paying taxes in the U.S. They were moving their headquarters out of the U.S. and they were finding ways to avoid paying taxes here. And not only that, but there was some uncertainty in the first term about his tariffs that caused business to limit investments. Well, the Biden area was a 180-degree change. Biden said he's not going to sign any trade agreements because he wants to invest at home. He wants to invest in our education, our infrastructure, our manufacturing. And he vowed to appoint labor union leaders, environmentalists as trade negotiators, and to empower them to tackle the kind of currency manipulation by countries like China, even though Wall Street kind of objected to that stuff. He endorsed stronger Buy America rules. He committed himself to trying to revitalize communities impacted by globalization and automation. And his investments in America actually did something. They actually did strengthen our thin supply chains. They did burst our working class job prospects. His 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 investments in terms of economics actually did pay off. And in fact, companies didn't even wait for the bills to make their way through Congress. Because he was pushing the country in this direction, countries started spending on new factories. Companies started working more construction. The total private and public spending in response to his policies was large. And his point was well taken. Federal investments that he was pushing, they attracted private investments. Those created jobs. It created industries. It demonstrated we're all in this together. And that, well, you know what? In terms of economics, that was true. But Biden didn't get any political credit for that. His semiconductor plant he built in Ohio, he started in Ohio. There were 7,000 union construction jobs, um, 3,000 permanent jobs. Many of those jobs wouldn't require college education, college degrees. I mean, that's good stuff for rural America. Almost a third of the initial 736 billion in private investments was made in response to president's policies, and those things landed in the communities that had been damaged by jobs moving out to China. More than half of that money is for clean energy projects. And you know what? The voters didn't care. They really didn't. There was no sign that voters gave Biden credit for this. There was no sign that long-term decline in manufacturing could be reversed. And Ohio was supposed to be a bellwether, and Biden lost there by 8 points. So he did good stuff economically, but it wasn't enough to really turn the politics in this country around. His manufacturing strategy failed. It's true that he improved manufacturing levels, but the gains were not all that great. They were kind of a rounding error in the context of our 160 million people. Um, as a share of total employment, manufacturing jobs continued to tick down a little bit, even though we were making these investments. Only 8% of Americans were in factories. And it's been going on since the 1950s. 1950s, 1 out of 3 Americans were working in an assembly line. Long before NAFTA and the China shock, automation was starting to thin out the payrolls. The total number of factory jobs was kind of constant around 17 million until 2000. But after that, it's just started going down and down and down. 10 years after that, factory employment was its lowest since before the attack at Pearl Harbor. So Biden's manufacturing strategy economically worked, but politically it failed. So Trump comes in 2-0, and what does he do? After Biden's manufacturing strategy fails, Trump starts another one. He puts even more into it, but that's also going to fail. See, the next iteration of globalization looks less China centric. There's no sign of reshoring and manufacturing with the United States. Those jobs that left during the China shock, they're gone. They're gone for good. We cannot execute a wholesale rupture of our relationship with China. We shouldn't even try. Even after more than 5 years of trade wars and acrimony, our two nations are still exchanging 600 billion worth of merchandise every year. We can't free ourselves from China at this point. Trump's trying very hard to do that, but it's you can't exaggerate the extent of the ongoing shift. In early 2024, businesses were working to reduce their outsourcing from China, but almost half of the respondents in business said they can't get away from China. They plan no changes. Yeah, wages in China have risen. Its signature advantage used to be low cost labor, but that's not its advantage anymore. Now its advantage is manufacturing scale, infrastructure that they have built over the last few decades that no country, including ourselves, can match. It would take years for any company in the US or any place else to replicate the kind of supply chains that China has built over the last few decades. So we can't get away from China. We have to manage our relationship with China. And as they grow stronger militarily, that's going to be tricky. I mean, what would happen? What'll happen when they finally move to retake Taiwan? Our tensions with them will spike. And if we put currency sanctions on China, it could hurt the world economy, including our own, because they have so many debts they have to pay in US dollars. If they can't get US dollars, they'll default, and that'll hurt the entire economy. This coming relationship with China has to be managed carefully by rational leaders. But we can no longer overlook the harm that globalization did to us. Economists and policymakers, they misread the consequences of trade liberalization. China exports really have displaced millions of U.S. manufacturing jobs. Clinton's insistence that the winners should be compensated and the winners from trade should compensate the losers, his advice was just totally ignored. Without decisive government action to support those who suffer from globalization, support for further trade liberalization will wither. Even if technological change was responsible, even if automation was responsible for most of that upheaval, not really globalization. So that's what went wrong. Proponents were hyping the economic gains from trade deals. They were matched by critics' tendency to exaggerate the pain caused by trade. But the trade negotiators were making a mistake. They prioritized issues such as intellectual property protection that had nothing to do with concerns of multinational corporations rather than voters, overlooking the questions of global tax avoidance, which threatened government's ability to invest in needed social programs. There was a growing populist backlash in the United States, in the UK, and Germany, elsewhere, made clear that we needed a new approach to how we were managing global economics. Clearly, more trouble was responsibility. Larry Summers, Treasury Secretary of Bill Clinton. There's anger and resentment and a desire that's present in all these countries. And unless leaders show that they are hearing these voices, crafting strategies that respect these interests, I think political developments that we have seen are only the beginning of what's to come. Did I skip a slide there?
There.
Well, there are success stories. For example, Greenville, South Carolina, They had tons of people out of work, but they invested in reinventing themselves. They leveraged trade schools, universities. They built a skilled workforce. They got BMW to build their U.S. site, their U.S. manufacturing site in their city in Greenville, South Carolina, and that just revitalized their economy. Their abandoned textiles were converted to loft apartments, restaurants, and bike plants flourished. Foreign manufacturers such as Bosch and Electrolux joined BMW, keeping the factory employment above national average. Financial management engineering jobs followed. Greenville shows that certain place-based policies can help individual communities. But it's not just globalization that's going to cause these kinds of problems. Globalization, moving jobs to China, affected our labor market, but so did automation. And so will green energy production. And so will artificial intelligence. All these things, some of which are yet to come, will impact some of our workers and benefit others. And just like we didn't help the people that were hurt by globalization, we need to learn to help the people that will be affected by green energy production, by artificial intelligence, by whatever comes after that. How do we help those who are hurt? Well, we see how to do it. During the pandemic, we gave government aid to people, millions of people. We kept people afloat. We dramatically reduced poverty rates. That gives us a hint of what we could do with ambitious social policies. If we combine economic impact payments, extended enhanced unemployment benefits, that allowed the typical family to maintain its pre-crisis consumption of 50% longer than it would otherwise have, according to a Federal Reserve study. Now, pushback from many employers who saw the extra jobless aids and discouraged American workers from returning to work. They brought such programs to an end when the pandemic ends. And we see that even now. There's things going on right now that we did during the pandemic, and they're stopping, and the GOP is insistent on stopping them. And the Democrats want to see some of these things continue because we see how much benefit they gave to our countries. You see, if we don't act, there's going to be some kind of upheaval in the next several years. It's either from AI or it's from green energy or it's from something else. And if we don't act, American workers will just have to tough it out on their own. Uh, we experienced transformative changes in the decades after the Cold War, but both parties failed to provide for the losers. There will be new labor market shocks. We need to put together a system that will help people that are hurt by these kind of shocks, help people who lose their jobs, not just because of trade, but maybe because of automation, maybe because of AI. If we don't do that, we're going to suffer continuous populist ferment, political polarization like we're seeing in our nation right now. Former Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson says it clearly. You got to take care of these people who are left behind. That's the challenge. That's where we're failing. That's where the elite get the blame. Unless we develop policy responses, technology and automation will continue to hollow out our middle class. This economist whose name I can barely pronounce, um, who's a Nobel Prize winning guy, he whines that this is going to come down from AI. Profound changes in the global economy, societal aging. There's going to be greatest labor market shocks in the next 50 years. We have to develop greater attention to training American workers to make better use of automation and AI. The U.S. risks more pain from manufacturing if it doesn't get creative with tax credits, subsidies to equip people to work alongside futuristic technology instead of just being replaced by it. Now, those place-based policies, what you saw in North Carolina, those will work. We can target some places for that, but that's got to be targeted to specific regional economic situations. Not every town will be helped by something like that. But there are so many hollowed out American hometowns that we need to look at each one of them and figure out how we can help them or not help them. It's really a big problem. Nearly 20% of our citizens live in these left behind places. They suffer from lagging population, lagging income growth. Heck, their schools and their hospitals are going out of business because there's not enough economic activity in these small places to support their community anymore. Uh, the market has steered almost three-quarters of all new jobs to big cities: San Francisco, Boston, New York. Chicago's here too. Um, and that lopsided pattern is not just the fault of globalization, it's also due to automation and other factors, but it has left an awful lot of Americans feeling neglected and alienated from the system, at least 20% of them. And when 20% of your population is unhappy, you see what's happening right now because of it. We can do this. We can pay for a more robust societal safety net. Now, that seems unsurmountable, but when we see the kind of federal budget deficits we have now, you know, we're spending more than $1 trillion paying interest right now. But the answer lies in reforming the tax systems. We've allowed corporations to shirk their societal responsibilities. We've allowed corporations to move their headquarters offshore and avoid paying taxes. They move their IP offshore. They have paid if they have found ways to not pay corporate taxes. If corporations today paid as much in federal taxes relative to the size of the economy as they did before Reagan, we'd have 300 billion more in additional revenue. We have to fix our corporate tax situation. We're not talking about raising taxes on ordinary income earners. We're talking about raising taxes on big corporations. If we could raise 300 billion in additional revenue every year, we could devote that not only to shrinking the deficit, but to funding new social programs and preparing our people for the kind of changes in our labor markets that are going to happen. It's not easy to do this. The last three American presidents have tried to change the tax codes, um, but they've all failed. But the need to change these tax codes and get more revenue of our corporate taxes is just undeniable. Our failure to address the China shock contributed to a growing gap between the rich and the poor, and that helped poison American politics. From 79 to 2007, the richest 1% of American households saw their share of after-tax income more than double, while the portion earned by the poorest fifth fell. One long-term study found that U.S. trade liberalization and income inequality rose in lockstep. It's trade liberalization is causing economic inequality because of the way we failed to manage it. The reason is that our tax system became less progressive, particularly on the corporate side, even as our need for redistribution to help the losers, even as that need grew. And the bottom line here is we identified the obligation, but we didn't fulfill it. Clinton, even today, Bill Clinton is saying you got two choices. You can pretend there's not going to be any change. If you do, we'll lose more jobs than we gain. Or you can make changes your friend. But if you want to have a free enterprise system, there's going to be losers, and that's when investment patterns change. And the obligation of all of us, our government, is to minimize the loss. Find the people something else to do so we can help keep growing. That's sensible as far as it goes. But that new pitch is just the same thing as he said 30 years ago. It's the same thing other politicians echoed 30 years ago. And we didn't do it then. Because we didn't do it then, that's why we're where we are now. Globalization made us wealthier as a nation, but the obligation to ensure that globalization gains were widely shared was identified, never fulfilled. We 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 allowed, frankly, we allowed the business community to talk us out of doing it. And the people Clinton who were to be left behind, they were left behind. They were left behind, and that has had political consequences, not just for his legacy, for his wife's ambition, but for our country's future, which is precisely what he foretold. He just couldn't make it happen. We couldn't make it. We're facing similar problems now. There will be continuing revolutions in how we work. They will benefit our economy as a whole, but there will be losers. We must take care of them, or their anger will ruin us as we see happening right now. And we have to raise the tax revenue that lets us do it, and that's on the corporate side. And now you know that. Now you know. Now you must help teach us what needs to be done. You must argue for tax policies that raise revenue, not me. You must help make sure that we use that revenue to help people. You tell your family, you tell your friends, you tell your associates, you tell your church members, you tell your politicians. You vote for the ones who get it. Because we can't trust our politicians to get this right. They didn't, and they won't unless we make them do it. And that's what I learned from that book. And that's what I got to say today. I really get passionate when I speak, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm ranting, but this is really important stuff to me, and I got to tell you what I feel. I'm ready to take questions.
Okay, give me one moment, Ed. All right, we have an inquiry from Josephine. What are the dates when the AFL-CIO killed that protection? I'd appreciate a bit more detail, e.g. dates of certain events, etc.
Well, as I said, you can get all kinds of detail by buying that book. Now, if you have specific questions like that one, I can go back. I got a Kindle edition of the book, so I can go back and look in the book and find that specific reference and provide it as a response. When we're done with these meetings, we send out the slides. I know I went through those slides quickly, and we send the slides out so you can all read them in more depth. And when I send out the slides, I will remember to look that particular point up and send it along with the slides. But I would encourage anybody who wants some more detail on what I've just said to just buy the book. I mean, you can get a Kindle edition for maybe $20. It's cheap. And there's a ton of detail in there about the people who did this to us or the people who did this with us and how they made it happen. There's just tons of detail that I obviously couldn't go through in this presentation. So I really recommend if you want to know more, the best way to do it is to get that book and read it. But specific questions like that, I'll research for you and I'll answer.
Okay, next question is from Nancy. Can the American people enforce Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution to impeach this administration?
Well, it's kind of off topic, but I'm happy to talk about things that are off topic, okay? Impeachment is a political process. It's not a legal process. Impeachment is how Congress is supposed to remove a president who needs removing. And it can only happen when Congress just agrees to do it. Now, right today, the GOP is in control of both branches of Congress. And in order for the GOP to agree to remove Trump, the GOP voters who voted for those guys would have to want to see that happen. I mean, if the GOP House representatives, senators get rid of Trump when their voters don't want them to get rid of Trump, they would all get kicked out of office. And they're not going to do something that'll get them kicked out of office. Trump's not going to be impeached and removed unless the GOP voters who elected those representatives want that to happen. So who knows? Maybe eventually Trump will hurt enough GOP voters that the GOP voters, the MAGA voters, will turn on him. But until the MAGA voters turn on Trump, Congress is not going to impeach and remove him, period. Um, so, and in fact, I doubt that's going to happen. I think that we're stuck with the guy. I think we have to fight him through the courts. I think we have to fight him through public pressure. I mean, public pressure can work. He pressured ABC to kill Jimmy Kimmel, and we came back and pressured ABC financially and said, no, you put him back on the air or you're going to lose a lot of money. And they put him back on the air. So not only through the courts but through public pressure, we can address what's happening in this country. I don't think that impeachment removal is in the cards. And it would be amazing if I saw the MAGA voters decide they want to see Trump impeachment and removed, and Congress is not going to impeach and remove unless the MAGA voters want it. That's the bottom line. But that is kind of off topic. So, but I'm happy to talk about whatever. Go ahead.
Okay, next question is from Josephine. What does the slide about South Carolina jobs say about 54 people being out of work? Please show the slide and explain what you meant.
Okay. I noticed the number 54 in there. Number 54 should have been removed. The number 54 was a reference to a footnote, and there were so many footnotes, I took them out. So just ignore the number 54. I should have taken that out of the slide. Sorry.
That's
But
okay.
I'm impressed that you noticed that. That's great. I'm really impressed. When I saw that slide come up, I say, "Oh crap! I hope nobody notices that." But somebody did. Congratulations.
Josephine is very astute. I will tell you that.
That's
Okay.
pretty funny.
Next question is from Sheila. It is, which political leaders connected the failures of globalization to the long-term cultural resentments that leave us politically divided?
Well, I think Bernie's one of the primary leaders that showed this. But frankly, not enough did. Really. I mean, Clinton tried, but he was long out of office, and the incessant push for corporate profits caused us all to ignore this stuff. Um, I'm telling you, the fact that we essentially have unlimited political money in this country means that people with a lot of money, if you can afford to hire a bunch of lobbyists, if you can afford to hire a team of lobbyists, you can get whatever you want out of Congress. And you can shout down opponents. And Congress doesn't really care what you and I think. They care what people who can hire lobbyists think. So, no, our political leadership has not done a good job in this area. And frankly, what I want to see in a presidential candidate next time is somebody who espouses the ideas that Bernie has, but who maybe doesn't have some of his baggage and maybe is a little more moderate and can get elected. Because the fact that the stuff you saw tonight that explains why we have left 20% of our population behind, we have to fix that. We have to we have to make it right for anybody who is willing to work a 40-hour week, ought to be able to have a halfway decent life. Whatever you can do. I mean, if all you can do is pick up garbage for 40 hours a week. I don't care. You got to earn enough so you can have a family and have a 2-week vacation once a year. I mean, and eventually save up to buy a house. We have to take care of everybody in this country, not just the very richest. And we need a leader that will do that. And we haven't had much of a one yet. And that's why the Democrats haven't won. And that's why Trump has been able to pander to people saying he can fix this when obviously he can't. I'm going to lower grocery prices on the first day. What bullshit? We need an honest guy who will tell the truth and bring forth credible programs that will help our working class, all of them. Um, and we haven't had much of that yet.
Okay, thank you, Ed. We'll go to the next question. It is from Josephine. Bernie says that 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Did you come across that stat or a similar stat or a source in the process of reading the book?
No, I don't think the book says that specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that wasn't true. Um, Over the last 40 years, we in this nation have pushed our workers closer and closer and closer to a financial cliff. A lot of it was done by the GOP. But the globalization stuff that Clinton did when we didn't take care of the losers, that just did even more of it. And when you get pushed over the edge of that financial cliff, you can't care for your family properly anymore. And then post-pandemic inflation came along and pushed a whole bunch of them over the cliff all at once. So we need to fix that. Uh, and there's a huge number of people who are working two jobs, and just getting their kids to school, and trying to raise their families, and can't even think about buying a new car, much less a house. I know some myself. I know a lot of them myself. Some of them are my friends' kids. One of my kids is in that shape. Um, and yes, there's tons of people living paycheck to paycheck. Any financial disaster uh, kills them financially, and in fact, that's why we lost. That's why we lost in 2024, because the pandemic had pushed a whole bunch of them over the cliff all at once, and they all just gave up on us, saying, "The heck with you, Democrats! You haven't stopped this from happening to us for the last 40 years. We're going to try this other guy because he promises stuff, and yeah, he's promising things he can't deliver." But that's yes. I haven't seen the statistic in this presentation. I have no reason to believe that's not accurate.
Okay, I just want to say Larry C has his hand up, and we will get to you, Larry, as soon as we're done with the questions. So Sherry has a question. What about Andrew Yang's type guaranteed income?
Okay, so um, a guaranteed income may well have a place in our economy. Um, I have thought about structuring a guaranteed income along the following lines. Um, you look at corporate income, and you look at corporate expenses, and you see if the company is making a lot of money, but they're hiring a lot of U.S. employees, and they're contributing to U.S. economics in our country, maybe they get a low tax rate. If you look at other companies, make a lot of money, but they're not investing in U.S. They're not hiring U.S. employees. They're not making a contribution to U.S. Communities. They're just making money overseas. Maybe they get a high tax rate. So then you use the revenue generated to create a universal income, and that can affect offshoring now and automation later. But to me, people don't. I don't think people want free money. I mean, there are some times when free money has helped, but I think most people want the respect of doing a job and being paid for it. Uh, I, I, I think that the right thing to do. I mean, if we get to a point, look, if we get to a point where automation and robots can make everything we need, and we don't need people to work anymore, then we're going to have a universal income so that people can buy groceries. Um, but we're nowhere near that. That's nowhere near that. Right now, the right thing to do is to make work honorable, to make people, um, to ask people to contribute a reasonable effort to community. In China these days, they have some companies that are working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And some of our tech companies are saying we're being beat by China because they're working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and we can't compete. I don't want to see the U.S. require us to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I want to see the U.S. require us to work 40 hours a week and have a decent life just because you're working 40 hours a week and whatever you can do. And um, the honor and respect for work, whatever that work is, be it being a welder or a plumber or a landscaper or whatever it is you can do. Um, sure, the things that are more productive should earn more money. I mean, a doctor's going to earn more money than a landscaper. Okay, we understand that. But still, a landscaper's got to earn enough that he can raise a family and maybe have a 2-week vacation a year. So I am much more interested in seeing work pay off for workers than I am in a universal basic income. Maybe there's a few places where UBI makes some sense, but to me, globally, it doesn't make any sense until we get to the point where automation and robots can make everything we need and nobody needs to work anymore. Then we're going to have a UBI. But before that, I'm not interested in it.
Hey, and now Josephine has a question for you, Ed.
Again,
Yes, and she says she is very curious about your professional background. Maybe you or Bill can say a bit.
I'll tell you about my background. Um, I'm the son of a Chicago cop and a secretary. Um, I grew up in Chicago. I went to Catholic grade in high school. I went to University of Illinois at Chicago. I earned an engineering degree in applied physics, and I spent my career in software engineering. I started two small companies here in Chicago. I participated in an IPO in Houston, Texas that created several hundred good paying software development jobs here in the US. Um, the product that I designed and managed implementation of was sold to Microsoft for $230 million. I got a tiny little bitty chunk of that. Um, the stock price went up, the stock price went down, the company was taken private. The private owners made me move all my jobs to India. I had to go to India many times to train the people who replaced all the people I had hired in the US. And when I moved all the jobs to India, they laid me off too. And that really pissed me off. The fact that we have laws and policies that encourage jobs to leave, high paying, good quality jobs to leave the country got me started in politics. When I was working, I wasn't political. I was working to make money and bring it home to my family. And when I started two small jobs, two small companies in Chicago, I learned how powerful capitalism is, how powerful competition can cause one to strive to build quality products and deliver them at a competitive price. I learned that capitalism is good when it's properly managed. And my experience with a public company being taken private, that I learned that capitalism can be damaging when it's not managed productively, properly by government. That's what I got into political action in my retirement. I ran into Bill Davis and Sarah Horan, Sarah mostly, who helped me get involved. They put me through an OFA fellowship program. I I worked on gun violence prevention because it was a topic that's important in Chicago. But I steered my career towards restoring our democracy. So I'm an engineer. Um, I have um, I have two adopted children, and I live in Morton Grove. And I'm here. I work with the League of Women Voters primarily on eliminating electoral college. I work. I'm an election judge. I run an early voting site. I'm very involved in running elections. Just this morning, I was at a luncheon where the leaders of all the early voting sites on the northwest side of Chicago were getting together to talk about what's going to happen in our next election, including are we going to have ICE agents outside of our polling places? Um, so I'm deeply involved in our democracy. And I also spent a whole bunch of time registering high school students. I was part of a team that registered 100 high school students at Maine South last week. The high school students are really coming forward and saying we got to get involved in our democracy. So that's who I am. And what I want most to do is to educate the public about what I see as important to um, for us to go forward in creating a more perfect union. Thank you for asking, Jennifer.
Well, there you go, Josephine. Thank you,
Jennifer,
Ed.
Josephine,
Yes,
Josephine. Sorry,
that's okay.
Josephine.
Okay, give me one moment. We have a question from Mark. Which countries' governments are doing this?
Doing what? Doing
I would take it pertaining to what you were speaking about in your
Mark.
presentation.
Mark, are you here? Just unmute. And give
Specify.
Mark the ability to unmute.
Put your hand up, Mark. Go ahead. Raise your hand, Mark.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Let me see if Mark is still on. Mark.
There he
There
is.
he is. There you go.
Give him the ability to unmute.
Yeah.
What do you?
Yeah, it's what countries are doing this kind of progressive you know, kind of work, I think Denmark probably is, Finland.
Okay.
There are
Okay.
probably others.
You're asking about what countries are building the strongest social networks to protect their workers.
Yep.
Clearly, the Scandinavian countries are the foremost in these areas. The the um the corporate entities in Scandinavia have agreed to work with labor unions uh, to build an economy that is broad-based and not just focused on business owners and business executives. Labor unions have immense power in the Scandinavian countries.
And Germany, yeah.
For Germany as well, but not as much as in Norway and Sweden and Finland, Denmark. Those countries are the absolute leaders in these areas. Germany and France, to some extent England, but
Anybody else? Anybody doing this in
uh,
Africa, India, Far East, Japan? Maybe Japan?
no,
Maybe?
no,
No?
no,
No?
not to my knowledge. So, I mean, well, Japan is Japan doesn't. Japan's got their own problems. I mean, Japan is an
Taiwan,
insular.
certainly.
Japan is Taiwan, yes, but Japan is a well, I don't really know that much about Taiwan. I don't know if they have uh, these kinds of social programs. I really don't know. I know that they have a free economy. I know that they're a highly capitalist and free market country, but I don't know that they have the kind of social programs that you see in Scandinavia. Really, Canada is another one that's really good. Canada and the Scandinavian nations. I have some contacts in Canada, and they just look at us as if with a gasp, like, "What is wrong with you people? I mean, are you not civilized?" But the Scandinavian countries are the premier examples of spots where business and workers have come together to build an efficient economy that supports everyone. And when look, when thanks for bringing this up. When a company strives for maximum productivity, part of what they do is minimum salary. And as our companies minimize salary, they're minimizing the disposable income that their workers have to buy their own products. And our GDP is limited because our consumers can't buy all the stuff we can build. The Scandinavians have been smart about that. They have said we realize that if we pay our workers well, they'll have more money to buy the stuff we build, and we'll have a stronger economy all the way around. They have really embraced what the term is. Uh, the term that is used for the economic system over there is um, social social democracy.
Yeah,
It often
yes,
gets
yes.
it.
Democratic social
No,
democracy.
no, no.
Yep.
It
Social
often gets
democracy, not socialism.
it often gets confused with democratic socialism. Over here, people talk about democratic socialism, and in reality, democratic socialism means moving to a socialist economic system through democratic means, which would be a bad idea because
Yeah,
socialist economic system always fails. The
and that's
real
not
system
it.
is over there. The real system over there is properly called social democracy. Social democracy is capitalism with strong regulation and redistribution to make sure that the benefits of a strong capitalist society are shared more widely and not just concentrated amongst the business owners and executives. Thank you, Mark.
Now I'm curious,
Okay,
how did they get there? I have some ideas on it, but anyway, I'll shut up.
I'm not sure how they got there. I think we're pretty far off topic right now. Let's
Yeah.
let's go back to questions. Thanks,
Thanks,
Mark.
Ed.
Okay, well, Diane has her hand up. I know Larry C had his hand up. So Larry C, if you would like to put your hand back up, we would greatly appreciate it. So let's go to Diane. She has her hand up. And if I missed anybody's questions in the chat, please raise your hand. Oh, Diane, where'd you go? Oh, Nicole has her hand up. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yes, I post my question. It's a little bit long, but I think I got involved with the anti-TPP since the Obama years, and I know that for 5 years the unions were very upset at President Obama for trying to push the TPP, and I see the corporation still repeating the same mistakes that they did with China by going to former communist country with a government-run and subsidized economies. And these government keep the wages dirt poor, and they steal our technology to beat us at our games. And I saw that over and over. They keep, they keep letting like countries that are emerging from communism, uh, they rush to those countries like Vietnam, and whatever we did, the mistake we did with China, we're repeating it again with all those new emerging countries.
So that's an interesting viewpoint. Um, so in general, the the idea is that um, if we can obtain labor for low quality products at a lower labor rate than we can do here in this country, then um, there's no reason for us to build low quality products. We could buy low quality products from them and put our labor into higher quality products. Now, the point you're making is that that works okay when you're dealing with countries that are actually working on a free market system. But countries that are still still control in a controlled economy where the controlled economy can uh, put undue subsidies an area in order to build uh, market share in an area that we can't counter, like what's happening right now with China with electric vehicles. China is heavily subsidizing the production of electric vehicles. And you could buy, we can't buy because it's not allowed, but people can buy electric vehicles from China uh, much more cheaply than we can those built here, not just because of the lower cost of labor, but because of unfair competition in terms of subsidies and currency manipulation and the likes. Certainly, in those cases, tariffs are warranted to offset the unfair competition. But there are plenty of examples where production has moved to lower cost areas that really are still free markets. I mean, you'll find a lot of, for example, a lot of German companies are moving production to East Germany and Slovakia, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the likes, because the lower labor costs there, yet they're able to maintain the quality that they have in the German production facilities, in part because those really are EU countries that are required to follow free market requirements. I understand the concern about TPP. As I said, there's very little public support for any of this globalization right now, and I think that I'm not here to defend globalization. I am not here to defend globalization. I'm here to say some globalization will happen, whether we like it or not, and it's up to us to manage it properly. And by managing it properly, I mean to say we need to help the people that are harmed by globalization. We can't stop everybody from being harmed by globalization, but we can help those that are, and we didn't. And we better learn to do that because we're going to have people harmed by automation, harmed by AI, harmed by green technology changes. We need to learn how to help our displaced workers. So the real issue here really isn't about globalization. It's about how we help our own people when our own people need help.
Can I add one thing? We can President Biden before his term ended, he tried to replace offshoring with nearshoring first, and then with friendshoring, and that's what's missing with, the mandate that our trade representative have, because the trade representative of the U.S. is not allowed to be concerned about human rights. He only has mostly the big corporation advising him, and very
Yes,
few labor workers and human rights advisors, and that's
I
why
agree.
that way.
I agree, and that's all part of properly managing globalization, to where we don't ignore human rights issues, and we don't ignore unfair trade practices. You know, human rights issues are really unfair trade practices in the long run. Pollution practices are unfair trade practices in the long run. We should not support countries that exploit their workers or harm the environment for economic advantage. Uh, those are proper goals for how we manage globalization. Uh, but still, the major point I'm trying to make is not just that we haven't managed globalization properly. The major point is that even when we manage globalization perfectly, there will still be losers, and we must learn to help those people. That is the most important point here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Okay, Diane, there you are.
Okay, this works better on the computer than the phone. Okay, so I agree with what you're saying. We need to protect the people from the excesses of globalization. And we really, I think because after the Cold War ended in the late 80s, there was this the neoliberalism of, just went wild. And, anything that seemed like socialism was criticized. So, but I was going to suggest also we really desperately need housing protection. And I don't mean just building more houses, because every time they build more houses, they build like, $2 million houses. And like, that's not the kind of house we want. We need to prevent the businesses from buying all the homes. So we have corporations buying single family homes, buying condominiums, and then renting them out at high rent. And it's just out of control. And in Switzerland, they have these laws called the Lex Kohler laws. They've had it since the 80s. And if they didn't put those laws in place, mafia groups from around the world would have bought all the real estate in Switzerland a long time ago. And they don't let foreign people in general, unless they live in Switzerland, buy a home, and they have all sorts of restrictions on buying a second home. And,
You
not,
know, you
they don't
know,
allow flipping homes, all of that. And I was just saying we need things like that.
I think that would be a great presentation. Why don't you put all those stuff together and bring them forward, and we'll have you present those information. I think that what you've just described is important, but I also think it's pretty much off topic for what we're talking about tonight. So put your thoughts together. Let's work together on putting together a presentation about that material. I'd love to do that with you. You know how to get a hold of me, ed.spire@gmail.com.
Okay, Ed, and if you don't mind, if you could put it in the chat, that would probably be helpful too to anybody else who might need to contact you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have a hand raised. Robert, go ahead, Robert M.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for the presentation. I got a lot out of it, especially about the Clinton years. My question, I did not know you were in technology. My question has to do with how much weight should us citizens put into the techno bros, so all these technocrats that are wanting to split this country up and do what they're doing. I mean, we already know, and it is a little bit off topic, so I
Well,
apologize
that's
for
fine.
that.
That's fine. But
Um,
this is Robert. This is something I was just reading about today. Um, when guys like Steve Jobs and the young Bill Gates were starting these tech companies. These people were pretty left. They were pretty leftist kind of people. Um, and and even through a lot of the growth of those companies, they were socially responsible. Their employees wanted the companies to be socially responsible. But over the last 10 years or so, guys like Zuckerberg and Bezos have gone off the deep end on the right. And it looks to me like they've just fallen prey to greed. They're doing whatever they can to make their company as rich as possible and to make their own personal wealth as big as possible. And a lot of Silicon Valley has just gone over to the dark side. And I worked out there for years. We merged with a company in San Jose, and they sent me out there to to help manage that company. So I was out there in Silicon Valley. I know these people, and they've gone over. Many of them have gone over to the dark side. I won't say that about Gates, but
And,
that's certainly true. That's certainly true of Zuckerberg, for example. Jeez,
yeah, and that
and Bezos too.
right. Well, I think a handful of them have, and to your point, that's why we do need to help everybody that are losing jobs to this. They don't care about the ecology. They don't care about anything but their
No,
bottom
no,
line.
right.
And I like uh, the Sweden laws that I would hope that I encourage her to make a presentation on that, because this is the all important part of being involved a little bit with our politics to keep our
That was that,
politicians
that
with
was Switzerland. That was Switzerland, not Sweden,
oh,
Robert.
so it's okay. Switzerland and Denmark. I've read a lot about. I've seen a lot about Denmark's, and I mentioned Germany because I worked with some Germans back in the '90s, and they, what they do with their labor force and how they treat them, and
Yep, yep,
it's the wage gap is getting so great that it's hard for the middle class to keep up. So,
absolutely.
thanks for the
And
presentation. I
you're
appreciate it.
welcome. But my closing comment to you about all these topics is that, and I do a lot of social media discussion, and it helps me see where people are coming from and hone my response to them. At the bottom line, the thing we got to do in this country is get control of unlimited political money. As I said earlier, anybody who can afford to hire a team of lobbyists, what do they want out of our Congress? Um,
Absolutely.
okay, so that is why the power of these tech moguls that have these massive fortunes are so damaging to our democracy, because their thumb on the scale of democracy is a sledgehammer. And
I was
we,
calling when they were passing that bill.
yep, okay, thanks,
Corporations are
Robert.
not people.
That's right. And they shouldn't have, the most importantly of all, money can't vote. And
Right.
in this country, money votes way too much. Okay, thanks,
100%.
thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Robert.
well, we're at more than an hour and a half at this point. If there's nobody else, thank you all for coming. I appreciate the fact that you hung in here. We still have 66 people on the call. That's great. Thank you all for being here. Please do something along the lines of what I said. Talk about this stuff amongst your friends and your family and your church and your community, and let's help form a more perfect union. Thank you all. Good night.